Hey everyone. So this video is going to be more of a sort of informal vlog kind of thing. This is Noah from Combined Reality, by the way, in case you don't know me. It's been a busy couple of weeks, and it's had its ups and downs. One of those downs was that our mechanical engineer produced a prototype of a really cool injection moldable design, and unfortunately I didn't really follow the process closely enough and check all of the dimensions. Superficially, the renderings looked okay. I thought, looks a little big on top, but that must just be the lines, because I thought he was working from certain models as a reference. And what we ended up with was this, and that's just tremendously huge on top, and not quite what I was expecting. He put a lot of work into this, by the way, so 3D printing parts that were designed for injection molding and not FDM 3D printing. So it turns out that what happened was that so he was supposed to be basing it on the 3.2, the North Star 3.2 design. I'll get back to this bracket in a sec. And one of the nicest things about the 3.2 design is that it moves the leap motion much lower than in previous iterations and considerably back. So it's quite a bit sleeker than some of the previous versions. So meanwhile, in-house, quite a while ago, we had attempted to do the same thing, move the leap motion down and back, and we did quite well with it, but we didn't get it quite as far down as the 3.2 design done by Florian over at Leap Motion. So you can see here, I'm just going to pop the leap motion out of here and put it in here, and you'll be able to see, while it is considerably lower than the previous versions, there's still sort of an unnecessary gap between the leap motion and the combiners, the lenses. So he ended up, because I had stressed the importance, of course, of maintaining consistent positioning in the design between the displays and the combiners, he extended that to the sensors. And so you can see here the relative position of the leap motion to the combiners is the same. Now, of course, it could have come down further and further back. So he was basing this just on the aesthetic of 3.2 and not on the positioning of the leap motion sensor, which I wanted to stay the same as the 3.2, and instead he positioned it in a way that was consistent with this. And that wasn't the only mistake. The other one, let me just reclaim our leap motion from this headset. The other issue was that we based the envelope for the lid on the one that I had created for this little 3.2 derivative that I did, and that was for the Intel T265 sensor and not the T261, and the T261 doesn't have the enclosure and is therefore considerably smaller and can be brought much further down. So there's all this unnecessary empty space in here that I didn't catch until I actually saw it in person, took measurements with calipers, and was like, wait, that's much, much taller than it needed to be. I thought that was just a trick of the eye. So yeah, we now have, I don't know if you can see that there because of light balance on my phone. Yay. So this is actually a considerably smaller top profile, and I think we can actually get smaller than that even. In fact, if we use an embedded Leap module and Leap Motion module, and there are plans for that, perhaps we could consolidate both that and the T261 into a pod at the bottom. So, this ate into our timeline a little bit, but we just keep trucking, and we're doing a new iteration of this with the correct dimensions. So let's see, what else? Last time, in the last update, I showed you this neat little wearable computer pack with this ASRock mainboard, which is a great little mainboard, and then this enclosure that I designed for it. Now, the one shortcoming of that, the thing that actually made this so bulky, was that I had to put this big voltage regulator in there, because that board will only run off of 12 volts. And so the only way to get 100 watts out of the 100 watt USB-C battery pack that I was using was at 20 volts, 5 amps. So I ended up needing to put in this huge voltage regulator board with those beefy caps to go from that to 12 volts, 8 amps, and hence the giant VREG board. So we've now gotten our hands on this considerably lower profile motherboard from Sapphire, and while the thermal management solution isn't quite as hardcore as the one on the ASRock, the overall profile is considerably smaller, and most importantly, it does not need that additional voltage regulator. So I can take one of these cool little cables that I found, which will take USB-C and does its own power delivery request, its own PD request, and then outputs 20 volts at this barrel plug at the end. And I can just put that right into the barrel jack on the main board and have it run off of that. So no extra cables looping back out, and that should make it considerably sleeker. So I'm psyched about that. Just got these, a couple of these today, so I've just started designing an enclosure around that, and so I should have a cool update about that, and a whole new wearable rig built around this board, this Sapphire board. And then, I said I was going to come back to this optics bracket. So I had some carbon fiber doped PETG filament loaded into one of our printers to print upgrade parts for the printer and the other printers, and thought, oh, well, it would be very cool to print some North Star parts out of that. I actually printed this with 0 infill and only 2 shells, so the structures are more or less hollow, but this stuff is strong. It's also light. So the optics bracket ended up being only 50 grams. Speaking of weight, that Sapphire board weighs only 2/3 as much as the ASRock board. So that little wearable pack, which was light enough to begin with, is going to be even lighter. So I'm targeting to make an entire North Star front section that's around or hopefully under 200 grams. I think at the moment it's looking like it's going to be more like 210. So should be a fun build. This doesn't actually impact the final product that we'll be making for Kickstarter, the sort of DK1, if I'm allowed to say that. And but it should be a fun build, and so I'm going to base the headset for this new rig on that. Something that I also talked about in the last video was, sorry to turn my back on you, was this USB hub, which I've since gotten up and running, and I was able to connect a T261 to it, and also the Leap Motion, and have them function simultaneously, and was able to power the displays off of it. So that was great. However, the firmware that I was using to do the simultaneous HID, so human input device, and mass storage was brutally slow for the mass storage. It was like 10 kilobytes per second. I did get it working. It was just way too slow. Fine for storing some calibration files, but if we're going to put a even 128 meg micro SD card in there, it just didn't make any sense. So we're actually going to, we're switching over to two boards stacked on top of each other, and both the T261 port and the unoccupied port are going to be USB 3 now, instead of just USB 3 on one of them, and then the auxiliary port being USB 2. So that means that in addition to the T261, if you wanted to, you could hook up something like a D435i, which is Intel's really great stereo depth cam. So and that just might make environment meshing easier and better than the solution that we're working on, or rather that somebody else is working on. I'll get to that in a moment. So we're breaking up the board into two tiers, one of which will have the Atmega 32U4 on it, and that's the same processor that's in an Arduino Leonardo or a Pro Micro. And the idea of putting that on there was that it was going to make it easy for people to add functions to the board, write their own firmware, and then attach little auxiliary quick boards to it to sort of build on their headset, since the whole idea behind the headset is that it's an open, community-driven design, and that people would want to tack on additional features. Unfortunately, in doing the mass storage and the HID in a single firmware, I wasn't able to actually use the Arduino bootloader, so that makes it a little bit less accessible. So so we've actually broken it up, and I realized, looking at the hub controller chipset, that we could do that you could actually put two devices on each port if they were non-removable devices, and one of them was only USB 3 and the other was only USB 2/1. So we're going to put the Arduino Leonardo compatible system, the Atmega 32U4. We're going to separate that from the mass storage, so it'll be really easily reprogrammable and customizable. And then we're going to put the mass storage on the dedicated USB 3 pins. Now that means that you won't be able to read and write to the mass storage if you hook this whole thing up to USB 2 instead of 3. I think people have USB 3 ports at this point, so I don't think it's an unreasonable requirement. So plus you won't be able to take full advantage of the the T261 if you're only connecting to it with USB 2. And what you wouldn't be able to take advantage of is streaming the images from the two cameras, from the stereo cam on there. And the reason why we want to access those two images is because there's a bit of software, an SDK called the Particle Engine, that one of the community members is developing. that will let us do real-time environment meshing and 3D reconstruction for an occlusion mesh, just from those stereo images. And that's really, really exciting. But for that, of course, we're going to need USB 3. Let's see. So that's a bit of what's been going on. Yeah, so again, ups and downs with the sort of missteps with the injection moldable design, but we're resolving that, and there's been a bit of change of plan with regards to the USB hub, and that's also in process. I think we're going to have the new prototype next week, early next week. I think that's already been sent out, and of course I'm making sure to track everything a little more closely now. And yeah, and we got that new main board, which I am super psyched about, because we won't need that big voltage regulator. So do me a favor and subscribe to our newsletter. I know, we keep sort of extolling people to subscribe to the newsletter, and there's a reason for that, and that is actually the number of newsletter subscribers is considered a key metric for Kickstarter readiness. So we're actually asking for a reason, and that number is pretty important. So one other thing, the combiner upgrade program. So the Project North Star headset kits have been sold through smart prototyping, and so everyone who has purchased one of the headsets with our older generation combiners, lenses, not just one of the headsets, but any of the kits that included those lenses, is going to be eligible to get an upgrade to the newer single-piece combiners with the better coatings for $15 plus shipping. So I would have loved to upgrade everyone for free, but the project is still a bit in the red, and we did have to pay a fair bit to have the injection mold for the combiners made. But I think it's pretty exciting that we're going to be able to offer that upgrade to people for a lot less than the price of just the combiner. Yeah, combiner upgrades, subscribe to the newsletter. We'll be sending out details about that on the newsletter. You actually need to be subscribed to that to get the information about the combiner upgrades. Kickstarter readiness. What else is there? AWE is coming right up. So Augmented World Expo. And that's one of my favorite events of the year. Of course, it is going to be remote, just like all other events right now. And we are going to be offering giving away a very cool prize as part of that. So if you're watching or participating in virtually attending AWE, keep an eye out for that. It's going to be a one-of-a-kind prize, not something you want to miss. Yeah, so that's it. I guess I've gone on for about 20 minutes here, rambled along, but should give you an idea of where we're at. And so like and subscribe and to the video, and also subscribe to our newsletter, please, because that'll give us a better idea of how many people are sort of interested in this. Oh, one more thing. No, this isn't information about Apple Glass, if that's what it's really called, Apple Glass. Google is kind of giving Apple the side eye right now, I'd imagine. Let's see. That derailed me a little bit. I've actually forgotten what I was going to say. Have a good one, and take care, and I did remember. On Twitter, somebody just posted about a very cool concept video that was done, sort of a proof of concept with Oculus Quest, of a virtual, sort of a virtual desktop environment where you had windows floating in front of you. As it happens, Mark Schramm, one of the developers of Superhot and also Gravity Lab, independent developer of Gravity Lab, and one of our most active community members, developed a very similar piece of software for, just started developing a very similar piece of software for North Star, and shot some very cool through-the-lens footage of that. So, good to see, it's not exactly feature parody, but that we're on the same track. Yeah, so take care, stay healthy, please. If you're in a place with infections, stay the hell home. And yeah, be well and stay tuned.